Every single person who has ever been swallowed by a mob thought they were thinking for themselves. That is the terrifying part. The moment you believe you are immune to the crowd's pull is the exact moment the crowd already has you. There is a phenomenon so ancient, so deeply woven into the fabric of human civilization, that most psychologists and historians simply call it one of the most dangerous forces ever documented in the study of the human mind. It does not announce itself. It does not knock on the door. It seeps in quietly like smoke beneath a closed door until the room is full and you cannot breathe anything else. This is the dark psychology of crowds, and once you understand it, you will never look at a group of people the same way again. In 1895, a French social psychologist named Gustave Le Bon published a work that would disturb the intellectual world for more than a century. He called it The Crowd, a study of the popular mind. His central claim was both elegant and terrifying, that when individual human beings gather into a crowd, something profound and irreversible happens to their minds. They do not simply add up into a larger version of themselves. Something new is born, something without memory, without personal responsibility, without the higher functions of reason that each individual would ordinarily possess alone. Le Bon described the crowd as a single organism with a collective soul, what he called the racial unconscious, surging to the surface when social structures dissolve. He watched revolutions, riots, religious movements, and political rallies, and in all of them he saw the same terrifying pattern. The individual disappears, not physically, not visibly, but psychologically. The person you were before you entered that crowd begins to recede, like a tide pulling away from shore, and what remains is something older, something rawer, something that belongs not to the civilized world, but to the ancient, tribal darkness buried in every human nervous system. Now you might be thinking, that sounds extreme. That sounds like something that only happens to unstable people, to those who lack education or self-awareness. You might be sitting right now with the quiet confidence that you would never lose yourself that way, and I want to sit with you in that confidence for just a moment, because that belief, that calm, reasonable belief in your own rational sovereignty, is precisely what makes you most vulnerable. The greatest danger of the crowd is that it preys on the people who do not believe they can be preyed upon. And here is the question that should unsettle you. If the crowd does not require instability or ignorance to claim you, if it can take the intelligent, the educated, the self-aware, then what exactly is it working with? What is the mechanism? What is the door it finds open in every human being, no matter how fortified they believe themselves to be? Let me tell you about a moment most of us have lived but never named. You're at an event, a concert, a political rally, a religious gathering, a sports match. Maybe you walked in as a skeptic, arms crossed, observing with that pleasant distance of the detached intellectual, but somewhere in the middle of it, something shifted. The music, the chanting, the unified movement of thousands of bodies breathing in rhythm, and without quite knowing how it happened, you were not watching anymore. You were part of it. You felt something large and warm and powerful move through you, and in that moment, it felt like truth, it felt like belonging, it felt perhaps like the closest thing to God you had ever encountered. That feeling is not accidental. It is not a spiritual malfunction or a sign of weakness. It is, in fact, one of the most ancient and necessary experiences in human evolution. Our ancestors survived not as individuals, but as tribes. The feeling of unity, of dissolving the boundaries between self and group, was once a matter of life and death. When the tribe moved as one, it survived. When individuals broke ranks, they perished. The neurochemistry that makes you vulnerable to the crowd, the floods of oxytocin, the mirror neuron synchronization, the dopaminergic reward of social belonging, that neurochemistry kept your great-great-great-grandmother alive on the savannah. So the crowd does not exploit a weakness in you. It exploits a strength. It hijacks the very biological wiring that makes you human, social, connected. This is why the most dangerous ideologies in human history did not spread through fear alone. They spread through ecstasy, through the intoxicating experience of being part of something larger than yourself, through the relief, and it is a relief, anyone who has felt it knows, of surrendering the burden of individual judgment to the warm certainty of the group. Think about the last time you changed your opinion simply because everyone around you seemed to hold a different one. Think about the last time you laughed at something that made you slightly uncomfortable, because the laughter of others gave you permission. Think about the last time you stayed silent about a truth you knew, because the crowd's consensus made that truth feel suddenly unreliable. These are not dramatic moments. They are ordinary Tuesday afternoons, and they are the crowd working on you, quietly, in the register you were never trained to notice. If this is already resonating somewhere in you, if you feel that small, uncomfortable recognition in your chest, then stay with me, because what comes next reaches even deeper. The dark psychology of crowds operates on three interlocking mechanisms that most people never consciously identify. The first is called de-individuation, the psychological process by which you stop experiencing yourself as a separate, accountable individual and begin experiencing yourself as a node in a collective. In a state of de-individuation, your internal moral compass does not disappear. It becomes subordinate. It quiets itself and defers to the crowd's moral compass, which is always louder. The second mechanism is social proof, a cognitive shortcut so deeply embedded in human psychology that even naming it does not free you from it. When we are uncertain, we look to others. When others seem certain, we adopt their certainty. It feels like reason. It looks like evidence gathering, but it is something far more primitive. It is herd navigation. And in a crowd, when everyone around you is moving in one direction with conviction, the very experience of doubt begins to feel like personal failure rather than intellectual integrity. The third mechanism is the most insidious of all, and it is the one that operates long after the crowd has dispersed. Psychologists call it group polarization. When we discuss ideas within groups of like-minded individuals, we do not reach balance. We radicalize. Gently, incrementally, almost imperceptibly, the moderate becomes firm, the firm becomes extreme, and the extreme becomes identity. What started as an opinion becomes a tribe marker. What started as a preference becomes a moral conviction. And once an idea is tied to identity, once challenging the idea feels like attacking the person, the dark work of the crowd is complete, even in its absence. Now here is where it becomes deeply personal. Because the question is not whether these mechanisms exist. They are documented, replicated, verified across cultures and centuries. The question is what you do with that knowledge. How does a human being live inside a social world, a world that is by its very nature a world of crowds and collectives, without losing the thread of individual consciousness that connects you to your own truth? The philosophers have wrestled with this for millennia. The Stoics spoke of the inner citadel, the idea that there exists within every person a sanctuary of reason that no external force can enter without permission. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events, not the crowd's roar, not the collective hysteria, not the social pressure that arrives dressed as consensus. The inner citadel is not a wall against the world. It is a home base, a compass, a place you return to when the crowd's gravity begins to pull. But there is a secular and psychological practice behind this philosophy, and it begins with what might be called conscious friction, deliberate pause. Before you agree with the group, before you laugh, before you join the chant or click the like button or repeat the narrative, one breath, one moment of internal witness, not to be contrarian, not to be isolated, but simply to ask, is this mine? Is this thought, this feeling, this impulse, is it mine? Or has it been handed to me by the room I am standing in? That single practice, deceptively simple, endlessly demanding, is one of the most radical acts of psychological sovereignty available to a human being in the modern world. Because the modern world is a crowd that never disperses. The algorithm, the feed, the comment section, the trending topic, these are crowds. They exert the same pressures, trigger the same neurochemistry, erode the same individual judgment. Le Bon's crowd has moved off the street and into your pocket, but there is a secret still deeper than this, one that most people in this conversation never reach. The deepest truth about the dark psychology of crowds is this: the crowd is not out there, it is in here. The mechanisms of de-individuation, social proof, and group polarization do not require an external crowd to operate. They live inside the mind as internalized voices, the crowd you absorbed in childhood. The crowd of your profession, your culture, your family system, the invisible consensus you consult every time you make a decision, every time you judge yourself, every time you decide what is possible and what is not. Carl Jung called this the collective unconscious, but in its most practical and immediate form, it is simpler and more actionable than that. It is the realization that most of what you believe about yourself, your limitations, your worth, your place in the world, was handed to you by a crowd. You did not choose those beliefs in solitude. You absorbed them in proximity. And because they came from a crowd, they carry the crowd's psychology. They resist individual examination. They punish deviation. They masquerade as objective reality when they are, at bottom, social constructions. To wake up to this is not to become cynical. It is not to distrust everyone or withdraw into isolation. It is to do something far more demanding and far more alive, to choose, to actively, consciously, repeatedly choose which voices you allow to shape you. To understand that the crowd will always offer you an identity, a narrative, a sense of belonging, and that you can receive those gifts without surrendering the one thing no crowd can give you and no crowd can take away: your own unmediated encounter with truth. The dark psychology of crowds is dark, not because it is evil, but because it operates in the shadow, in the place below conscious awareness, in the gap between stimulus and response, in the warm, seductive feeling of unanimity that so often masquerades as wisdom. To bring it into the light is not to destroy it. It is to reclaim something essential. It is to remember that you are not simply a node in a network, a unit in a collective, a voice in a chorus. You are, beneath all of it, beneath every crowd you have ever been part of, beneath every identity the world has fitted you with, a singular, irreplaceable locus of consciousness that no crowd has ever fully reached. Carry that with you, not as armor, not as arrogance, but as a quiet, unshakable remembering. Because in a world that grows louder and more collective by the hour, the most radical thing a human being can do is think their own thought, in their own voice, and mean it. If this video reached something real in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone standing at the edge of a crowd, wondering if they are still themselves. Like, subscribe, and come back, because this journey into the deeper architecture of the human mind has only just begun.